Shalom and welcome to Israel. Today we have a very special day planned for you. We're going to be touring one of the holiest cities in the world, Hebron. Now people often ask me, Nosson, what's your favorite place to tour in all of Israel? And I would always tell people for years, I don't have a favorite. Ask me who my favorite kid is. I love them all. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was two places that really stand out. The city of Sfat and the city we're going to visit today, the holy city of Hebron. My name is nosson schulman, and I'm going to be your tour guide today. This is the second episode in our virtual tour series. The first one was in Jerusalem, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to view it, I highly recommend you take a look. It's on my site, and there's a free trailer. Before we start, I'd like to mention that today's tour is sponsored by VIP Israel Tours and Authentic Virtual Tours of Israel. Hebron is the second holiest site in Judaism. It was here where God made his eternal covenant with the children of Israel. It was also here in Hebron where monotheism first started. Right now, we're standing in Kiryat Arba, which is a Jewish town in Judah and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. Today, Kiryat Arba is a separate town from the municipality of Hebron. In biblical times, they were one and the same. The book of Genesis says, Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. So they're synonyms. When people think about the West Bank, many people think it's a war zone because it's often in the news portrayed that way. But if you look around you, Kiryat Arba, this settlement, is just like any other Jewish town with nice homes, schools, synagogues, and shopping centers. So now we're going to go and explore. Follow me. We're about to leave now, today's Kiryat Arba, to go to Hebron. You could already see in the background that Hebron is starting to appear before us. In biblical times, as I mentioned, they were one and the same. Now, where does the name Kiryat Arba come from? First of all, Kiryat in Hebrew means a village. Arba means four. So why is it called the village of the four? The Bible actually tells us in Joshua where the name comes from. The name of Hebron was Kiryat Arba, who was the biggest man amongst the giants. As we see in the book of Numbers, the story with the spies, that the town of Kiryat Arba had giants, and the most powerful one was named Arba. But as I mentioned before, Arba also means four. According to Jewish sources, the four has an even deeper meaning, an added meaning. The four couples that are buried in Hebron. Who are these four couples? Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, and, believe it or not, Adam and Eve. So Kiryat Arba, the village of the four people that are buried there. If Hebron and Kiryat Arba are one and the same in biblical times, today, why are they separate municipalities? It has to do with the Six-Day War in 1967, because from 1948 to 1967, Jews were forbidden to come to the second holiest city for them. In 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel liberated this land, and Jews were now able, for the first time in 19 years, to come and pray at their holy sites. The Six-Day War happened in June. In September of 1967, the Arab nations got together in Sudan and basically said, we're not going to normalize trade or any recognition with Israel. But Israel still held up hope that one day it would be, and they didn't want Jews to start building communities in these areas. Now comes in a very important historical figure, Rabbi Moshe Levinger. Since Jews wanted to reestablish the community, someone was going to have to take the lead, because all great things usually come with a struggle, and this would be one too. Rabbi Levinger in 1968 is going to rent a hotel from an Arab in Hebron called the Park Hotel, and he's going to have a Passover Seder. And now the Arab knew that there's a good chance that Rabbi Moshe Levinger would continue to stay after Passover, but he needed the money, so he rented it out. At the Passover Seder, Rabbi Moshe Levinger said, we're going to reestablish the Jewish community of Hebron. He continued to pay the rent, and the Arab wanted the money, so he was willing to do it. But the Israeli government really didn't want to rock the boat, so they're going to take Rabbi Moshe Levinger and put him in jail. If they thought that would dissuade him, they were wrong, because Rabbi Moshe Levinger was of a different type. He came back, and they put him in jail. He came back. Eventually, the Israeli government said, fine, we're not going to give you Hebron, but we will give you a new town, Kiryat Arba, right beside it, and Jews started moving in. Today, as you can see around you, this town is flourishing. Now let's go and enter together biblical Hebron. Follow me. Now we're standing in front of a Jewish home in Hebron called Beit HaShalom, or the House of Peace. Now, as I told you, everything in Hebron to establish a Jewish community is a struggle, and this building was no exception. The road we were just on between Kiryat Arba and now on our way to Hebron for many years had no Jews. In 2007, Jews went up to the owner of this building and said, "Can we buy it from you?" And he sold it to them. Later on, he denied that he sold it to them because he was afraid. Because according to Palestinian law, selling to an enemy foreigner, i.e. the Jews, is a capital offense where you could get the death sentence. In fact, the people that sold this, there were two that sold this property, the middlemen. One of them was arrested in Jordan and one of them arrested by the Palestinian Authority. So it's a real threat. So they bought it in 2007 and came to live here. But then the owner said, "I didn't sell it to them." Ehud Barak, who at the time in 2007 was the defense minister and not a big fan of the Hebron settlement movement, will have them taken out forcibly by the IDF. And they came back, and again they were forced out in 2008. By 2014, the courts ruled the Jews can come back. And several families that are Jewish now live behind me. They're renovating it to make even more apartments. But again, it came with a struggle. What kind of evidence did the courts have in 2014 that they didn't have in 2007? First of all, the transaction actually had been videotaped. That wasn't public knowledge in 2007, so that was definitive proof. And more than that, the fact that the two middlemen were arrested by Jordan and the Palestinian Authority was used also as evidence in the Israeli court, because why would you arrest them if they didn't sell anything? Now you can see that some of the construction to make more apartments is being done behind me. And eventually, when it's done, it'll look very beautiful. In front of us is the second holiest site in Judaism, and it's actually could be called the first Jewish purchase. Behind me is one of the world's oldest buildings. It's over 2,000 years old. The oldest continuously used building in Israel, possibly even the world. You have buildings and structures that are older, like the pyramids, but they haven't been in continuous use. This building has been in continuous use at its original size. Follow me. Every time I come here, I feel a strong sensation in my heart as if this was the first time I was here. There's a Jewish concept that every word or even every letter in the Bible is there for a reason. Therefore, the Bible uses its words sparingly. But where we're standing right now was so important that it gets its own chapter. For those of you who watched the first episode, you're going to remember that we talked about the binding of Isaac by his father Abraham. God comes to Abraham and says, "Go bind your son and kill your son." And it was, of course, this was a test. After that story, they're on their way to Hebron, and then they hear the bad news. Abraham, his beloved wife Sarah, had passed away, and he was devastated. But he wanted to make sure that she would have a proper burial, the best burial. As the Bible says, Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. You see, at the time they were the same, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and to bewail her. And he said, "I am an alien and a resident among you. Grant me an estate for a burial site with you, that I may bury my dead from before me." Now, why is Abraham picking this place of all places? Like, there's no other burial sites, it has to be this site? Well, to first answer that question, you have to know what was here at the time. If you were to come then, you wouldn't have seen this great structure built by King Herod 2,000 years ago. Actually, you would have seen a cave, the cave of Machpelah. By the way, what does Machpelah mean in Hebrew? It means the cave of the double. It was actually a double cave. Once you walk into the cave, you see a smaller cave. And that's where Abraham wanted to bury Sarah. But why? What's so important about this place? According to Jewish sources, one of Abraham's sheep ran into the cave, and he went after it to bring it back. When he went into the cave, he smelt the scent of Garden of Eden and discovered that Adam and Eve were buried there. And he said, this is the place where I'm going to one day bury my wife Sarah. So now that time had come. And the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, hear us, my Lord, you are a prince of God in our midst. In the choicest of our burial places, bury your dead. Any of us would not withhold his burial place from you, from burying your dead. The local Canaanites really revered Abraham. So Abraham said, if it is truly your will to bury my dead from before me, heed me and intercede for me with Hebron, son of Zohar. Let him grant me the cave of Machpelah, which is his on the edge of his field. Let him grant it for me for full price in your midst as an estate for a burial site. Abraham didn't want to just buy the cave, but the field that surrounded it. What field? This field over here. Now, why is Abraham going to buy this place? Didn't God already give it to him? He promised him chapters earlier in Genesis that it would be his one day and his descendants. Why does he have to pay money for something that which is his? According to Jewish sources, there are 3 places the Jews paid money for something which belonged to them so no one should later claim it was stolen. One is the cave, which is underneath this building. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem is the second. And the tomb of Joseph in today's Nablus is the third. You could see the foresight of our forefathers because these are the 3 of the most disputed places today. Now Ephron was sitting in the midst of the children of Heth, and Ephron responded to Abraham in front of the children of Heth for all who came to the gate of the city, saying, no, my Lord, heed me. I have given you the field, and as for the cave that is in it, I have given it to you. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to give it to you for free. Now Abraham knew the kind of person that Ephron was. He was known as a swindler. And Abraham knew that he wasn't going to get it for free. And he wanted to pay for it anyway so that no one should later claim it was stolen. So Abraham bowed down before the members of the council. He spoke to Ephron in front of the members, saying, rather, if only you would heed me, give the price of the field, accept it from me that I may bury my dead. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying to him, my Lord, heed me. Land worth 400 silver shekels between you and me. What is it? Bury your dead. We see from this that Ephron had no intention ever of giving it for free. It was a sale tactic. And then he named the exorbitant price of 400 silver shekels. Abraham's going to pay Ephron in front of everyone. And now the land was his. And he's going to go and bury his wife Sarah. Now let's go check out what's known as the 7th step. Take a look over here. Don't these stones look familiar? From those of you who watched the first tour, they should be, because it was built by the same person, the infamous King Herod. Before Herod had built this, you would have just had a simple cave. And he, being King Herod, he loved to build. He loved to do grand things. And he decided to build this building. Herod is going to build this structure over it about 2,000 years ago. Before that, Jews had been coming. It had just been a cave for the 2,000 years prior. Even though we're not inside the building now, you could see all around us that there are burnt out candles, which people light as memorials. You see prayer books. Why are people praying out here when they could be praying in there? The answer has to do with a Jewish concept. There's a concept that there's two ways to become holy. Something which is intrinsically holy by its very being, and something which is made holy by the people that go there. Holy sites like the Temple Mount are always holy. Inside the Cave of the Patriarchs, it's always holy. These are holy sites. But for 700 years, people prayed here. And by having our prayers here, that made the site holy. After King Herod built this big, beautiful building, people could still access the cave from the building itself. And Jews would continue to go there over time. The Byzantines will make it into a church. The Muslims come into Israel in the year 638 and make it into a mosque, keeping a small part of it as a synagogue. Then the Crusaders are going to come in 1099, and they're going to expel the Jewish population from here and turn it back into a church. In 1267, Baibars, a general from the Muslim army called the Mamluks, they were the empire that ruled from Cairo. They ruled Hebron and all of Israel. They were fanatical, they were radical, and they said that this building is so holy that Jews and Christians can't enter it. Only Muslims. It's a mosque, no Jews and Christians allowed. And the cave itself, which is underneath the building, was so holy that even Muslims couldn't enter it. And he sealed it up, and it's remained sealed to this very day. And as we're going to see, there are a couple of exciting exceptions. Now, this place is known in history as the seventh step. Because although Jews and Christians were forbidden to enter the building, the Mamelukes who ruled here, the Muslim Mamelukes, threw us a bone and said, you can't go in, but you can come up to the seventh step. There used to be a staircase that went up all this entire wall, and there would actually be an armed guard, a policeman, who would make sure you didn't get past the seventh step. And this is where Jews and Christians would come and pray their hearts out, making the site very holy, which is why today people make an effort to come and visit here. In 1967, when the Jewish people came back, they removed the seventh step because the staircase represented not being able to enter our building. But nonetheless, people still come and make every effort to pray here. As I mentioned before, this building was built by King Herod, but when the Crusaders came in 1099, connecting the building, they built a big Crusader fortress, which we're standing in. Where is it now? Well, it's been removed, though there are some remnants, because when Jordan controlled here between 1948 and 1967, they thought that this looked like a tremendous eyesore, so they removed it. But if you come over here, you could see down here the remnants of this Crusader fortress. And up there, at the top with the flags, is a further remnant. Again, the Jordanians thought it was an eyesore, so they took it down. We've now entered the cave, and I'm very excited because my ancestors are buried here. It allows me to come here and pray and really connect with my heritage. Now, if you look at the floor, you're going to see that it's more than 2,000 years old. This is the original floor from King Herod, and it's still in pristine shape. One of the most interesting stories in the Bible took place over here. In Egypt, Jacob lived with his 12 sons. Jacob died, but beforehand he made Joseph swear that he wouldn't bury him in Egypt. He'd bury him here in the cave of Machpelah with his ancestors. So a big procession came from Egypt. They're going to come with full honor and bury Jacob. According to Jewish sources, there's an interesting tradition that when they came here, the procession, Esau, the brother of Jacob, the wicked one, was standing in the way. And he says, this is my cave because I was the firstborn, and therefore I should be buried with Isaac and Abraham. And the sons of Jacob said, but Esau, Uncle Esau, you sold the cave for soup to our father. It's ours. And he wanted to be difficult. He's like, oh yeah? Where's the contract? They said, we don't have the contract on us. The contract's in Egypt. And he said, okay, well, I'm not going to let you in. And Dan, right? Dan, one of the fifth son of Jacob, had a son who was a deaf mute. Now, he couldn't understand what was going on because he couldn't hear this argument. But he did see that his grandfather's funeral was being delayed. So what he's going to do is he's going to take a sword and cut off Esau's head. So according to Jewish tradition, not only are Adam and Eve buried here, not only are Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob and Leah buried here, but so is the head of Esau. As I mentioned to you, in 1267, where we're standing right now, became off limits to Jews and to Christians. And they couldn't come in here. And to Muslims, they couldn't even go in the cave because it was that holy. And the cave was sealed for 700 years. In 1968, there was a little girl named Michal Arbel, and she and everyone around wanted to know, what is down there? We haven't been there in 700 years. When the last time the people went down there were no cameras. So as I mentioned, there was an 11-inch hole, and it happened to be that this 12-year-old girl was about 11 inches around, so she could fit in. So they asked her father, and the father, who himself was a very important Israeli official, took his 12-year-old daughter, tied a rope around her, and sent her into the hole. And she's going to land on a pile of money. What's the pile of money doing there? I guess people, like a wishing well, people had thrown it over the centuries, so that's what she landed on. And when she was there, she saw 3 stones, the middle one being the biggest one. And then she saw a little cave, which she's going to go under, and then she's going to get to stairs, a staircase that no one had ever seen for 700 years and ascend the stairs and see that it was blocked. And then she's going to come back. And then her father said to her when she came back, wait a minute, why not take some pictures? And he's going to send her down again to take the pictures. In 1981 was the last exception of people going into the cave. The leader of the community of Hebron, Noam Arnon, who's still one of the leaders of Hebron today, wanted to see where the staircase led to. So he's going to break the wall, go down the stairs that Michael years earlier had gone up and had reached the blocked door. And he's going to go into this cave where there were 3 stones. And he was disappointed because he didn't see a double cave like it had been said in the Bible. But then he felt something weird underground. He felt the breeze, the wind coming from the ground. What wind comes from the ground? Something must be there. So he's going to dig through some stones, and he found the cave. With a second cave, he took some pictures, and he's going to find a lot of pottery showing that Jews had been praying there for thousands of years until it was off limits. Since then, it's been sealed and no one's been down there. As we're leaving, notice that there are 3 rooms. Right now, we're in an open courtyard. This room is dedicated to Abraham and Sarah. Now, if you follow me into this room is dedicated to Isaac and Rebekah. And the 3rd room over here, to Jacob and Leah. Now, most of the tombs that you see in this building are not of the forefathers. They were added here later on by the Muslim Mamelukes in the 1200s. If you notice behind me, there's a curtain. And then behind the curtain is a gate. Today, Jews and Christians are only allowed to use a small percentage of the building. Most of the building is Muslim. We're on the Jewish side. This gate is separated to the Muslim side. Now their side is nicer, nice and carpets. And Jews and Christians cannot go there, except 10 days of the year. There are 10 days of the year where Muslims cannot enter. And it revolves around the Jewish holidays. And there are 10 days where only Muslims can come into this building, like the Fridays of Ramadan, for example. So the building today is divided. Of course, we're on the section that's for non-Muslims. If you look around, you can see a really nice panoramic view of Hebron. And if you want to know today where the cave is actually underneath the 7th step. Although Hebron was one of my favorite cities, unfortunately, tourists don't come to Hebron as much as they should. With the exception of Orthodox Jews, most groups won't come here. My groups will always come here, but most groups won't. And if they do come here, they're not going to see the things I'm about to show you. Very special. For example, that building over there with the Israeli flags is called Beit HaMachpelah, or the House of Machpelah, named after the cave. Now, what did I tell you before? Everything's a struggle, right? Jewish settlement in the Holy City, the oldest Jewish city in the world, where God made a covenant with Abraham. Here, Jews are returning, but with a struggle. So, for example, that apartment was bought by Jews in 2012, and they went to go live there. But then the court said, you have to leave. By the way, if you remember, I told you that there is a law on the Palestinian books that someone who sells to a Jew is liable to the death penalty. Well, the person who sold this to Jews is actually on death row. The Jewish community of Hebron has been trying to get the UN to put pressure to release him. The death sentence hasn't been carried out, but he is still in prison. In 2018, the Jews came back, and the courts ruled as kind of an interesting ruling. They said, while this place was legally purchased, the Jews can't move in here. If you're wondering yourself, where's the logic in that? Unlike in some place, right now we're in the West Bank. Israel has not officially annexed it here, which means that government law doesn't apply here. Military law does. So they can make up generally the laws that they want to, and the courts will usually not intercede. In 2018, they were evacuated. But in August 2019, the courts came up with a second ruling, an even weirder ruling. They said half the building was purchased and half still belongs to the Arabs. So the Jewish families have moved in. You could see that the Israeli flags are there. And again, it came with a struggle. But nonetheless, it is in Jewish hands again. Now we're entering the current Jewish community of Avram Avinu. What does that mean in Hebrew? Abraham, our forefather. Of course, Abraham lived in Hebron, so it's only fitting that they named the community after him. This has been the location of the Jewish community for centuries, and it's been reestablished. This sign over here is a memorial to Shalhevet Pass. She was a beautiful 10-month-old infant, and where we are right now, the mother was pushing the stroller, walking like this. From up on the hill, they shot at the stroller and killed Shalhevet Pass. And that's why the memorial is over here, because the 10-month-old was intentionally killed in this spot. I want to stress to you that Hebron isn't just a biblical city. It's a living city. People live here. These houses, people live in. This is a kindergarten over here. And just like the prophecy said, the Jews will come back one day. And you can see the prophecy being fulfilled before your eyes. This had been the Jewish community of Hebron for centuries. In 1540, Jews who had been expelled from Spain came to Hebron and made this place even bigger. And they're going to build, behind you, the synagogue, today known as the Avram Avinu Synagogue. And we're going to get to that, why that is. But this is a very special place. Now, I want to show you something that you're not going to see usually on tours, but follow me. I want to show you something over here, which kind of describes the community of Hebron. Take a look at these bikes. What do you notice? Or better yet, what don't you notice? They're not locked up. That's surprising, especially when you consider that Hebron's Jewish community today has about 850 people, 3 digits. The Palestinian Hebron is much bigger. How big? Well, it depends who you ask. Anywhere between 120,000 to 250,000, right? So that's 6 digits. Now, why such a big plus and minus? Because it's very hard to know how big their population is, because the Palestinians get funding from the UN based on how many people they have. So there are many towns that exaggerate, sometimes even double, how many people live there, because it means more funding. So why, in a place like that, with knowing that, why is aren't bikes locked? And the answer is because the people that live in Hebron are a special type of people. If you're going to live in Hebron and be surrounded, you have to be strong. You have to be tough. And being as they're tough, they're not afraid to leave their bikes unlocked. Living here takes courage and strength. And the people that live here exemplify that. I'll give you one story. There's a local here who had a daughter who was 16, and she was walking in the Arab part of Hebron, and she dropped her phone. It was a smartphone. It was an expensive phone. So she called it up, and the person who answered, an Arab who picked it up, said, "You can have your phone back, 2,000 shekels." So she said, "What? No, I'm going to talk to my father." And she said his name. And the Arab guy got scared and says, no, you know what? I'm going to give you back the phone. Just be more careful next time. And she hung up on him. He calls her back and says, "No, I'm going to give it to you." And she's like, "Leave me alone. My father's going to deal with you." And she hangs up. And she wouldn't take the call. Eventually, the person who found the phone is going to bring it to the police station to return it. Now, they had to destroy the phone in case a bomb had been put there. And of course, when they had destroyed the phone, no bomb had been there. He was just legitimately afraid. And those are the types of people that are able to live in Hebron. If you don't have courage, then Hebron's not a community for you. Why is this community called Avram Avinu? And of course, the synagogue takes the name of the community. Originally, this place was known as the courtyard. But in 1619, there was a bad plague that hit Hebron, and everyone left the city, except for 9 brave souls. Now, in Judaism, to have a quorum, to be able to pray properly, 10 men are required. 9 men doesn't make the cut. Of course, if a person doesn't have that and they're in the middle of nowhere, they can pray on their own. But in general, you need 10 men. And it was the most important day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And they were about to start a prayer called Kol Nidre, which is a prayer which is one of the most well-known Jewish prayers. But they didn't have a 10th man. No, they didn't expect some Jew would be coming. So Jewish legend says that suddenly they saw a man in a white beard walking and saying, I'll join your minyan, I'll join your quorum of 10. And he stayed for all of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a fast day. So after the Yom Kippur ended, they all said, I want to be the one to give him the food. No, I want to feed him. And they drew lots. And they turned around and he wasn't there. And they realized it had been Abraham who had joined them, came to join his children. And as a result, the neighborhood has been called that ever since. Now behind me, right in front of the Avram Avinu community, you have the old Jordanian fruit market. Now this is actually owned by Jews. In 1807, a rabbi bought this land in a ceremony of which 22 Arab dignitaries were there, and he bought the land and he built a synagogue, a yeshiva, which is a place of Torah learning, and homes. In 1948, Jordan came and tried to destroy evidence to say that Jews were never there. And in 1960s, they are going to build this fruit market. When Israel liberated this place in 1967, they allowed the Arabs to stay in the fruit market. Now we're going to drive to another community, a community that is not as old as the Avram Avinu. It's only about 140 years old. Now you know your city's old when your new part of town is only 140 years old. So we're going to visit Beit Hadassah, or the original clinic of Hebron. Now we're going to enter Hebron's second Jewish community, and in my opinion this is the most exciting one. Come follow me. The building behind me is known as Beit Hadassah. There's a collection of hospitals in Jerusalem called Hadassah hospitals. Happens to be that all three of my kids were born in that hospital. In 1893, Hebron and much of Israel was considered a backwater. Built in 1893, it was originally a clinic. Hebron, like much of Israel, was a backwater. You didn't have advanced medicine and people died young. To stop that, there was a rabbi, the community is going to raise the money from Jewish communities in North Africa, like Morocco, Libya, to be able to build this hospital. And it was a state-of-the-art hospital that treated both Jews and Arabs. And if you couldn't afford to pay, you didn't pay. Later on in 1912, the hospital, they'll build a new floor and the hospital will move up there. The bottoms would become a boys' school. You can't come to Hebron and not mention the 1929 massacres. See, Jews had lived here for over 4,000 years. In 1929, the Arabs, led by their leader, the Mufti, who was a close friend of Adolf Hitler. In fact, he spent the war years in Berlin because the British who controlled here wanted to arrest him. The Mufti used Jews praying at the Western Wall as an excuse to start a riot, saying Jews are trying to take over the holy sites. And there was riots all over the country. Well over 100 people were killed. But in Hebron itself, 67 people were killed. Hebron is divided into two jurisdictions. 80% of it is controlled by the Palestinians and 20% by the Israelis. Anywhere that I've taken you or I'm allowed to visit as a Jew is only in that 20%. If you look past this fence, that over there is the start of the Palestinian part of Hebron. Now, if you look on a map, you'll see that Hebron's divided into H1 and H2. H2 is the part that's controlled by Israel, and everything you see over that fence, past the guard post, is H1. The building behind me historically was called Beit Romano. It was purchased by Jews in 1876 and made into a synagogue and a yeshiva. In 1917, when the British came and took over Israel, they are going to confiscate it and make it their police station. As I mentioned, Hebron is known for its 1929 riots, and it struck here. The British police, who were just in that building over there, for 3 days allowed the riots to take place. They didn't stop it. And after 3 days, they gathered the surviving Jews, brought them to that building, and then evacuated them to Jerusalem. And that was the end of the Jewish community, which had been around for 4,000 years. Until 1979, when they returned, where? Behind me. And it's an interesting story. Rabbi Moshe Levinger, we talked about him, he's the one who started Kiryat Arba. He tried to establish Hebron as the Jewish community, and the Israeli government didn't want to rock the boat, so they said, no, just Kiryat Arba. But once he got Kiryat Arba, he said, we came here for Kiryat Arba? No, we came here for Hebron. And this is Jewish-owned land. No one even denied, the Arabs weren't even denying it. And why can't we just why not just move in there? So what they did, they went in And of course, they were arrested. So Rabbi Moshe Levinger's wife, who was a tremendously strong person, suggested that only women and kids come into the building because the soldiers were less likely to evacuate them. And in the middle of the night, they're going to take a ladder and sneak through the windows up there. And when the Israeli soldiers heard that they were in there, they asked, what do we do? And Menachem Begin, who was a friend of the settlement movement, said, you know what, let them stay, but the law is the law, so what do? And he made a special rule. The women and children can stay there, the men are not allowed to join them, and if they leave that building, they're not allowed to return. So every day, the community would take a ladder, put the ladder up, and bring them food, bring them laundered clothes, and they lived that way for a year. They didn't have running water, but they understood that Hebron was important, and the Jewish heart cannot get away from Hebron, so they toughened it out. In 1980, on Shabbat, Friday, the Jews have a custom to say Kiddush on a cup of grape juice. Kiddush, it means to sanctify. We take the cup and we thank God for the Shabbat. And so some boys came from the yeshiva to come and say it for the kids. And then someone named Abu Snei, whom we mentioned before, he's the current mayor of Hebron. He shot those 6 boys dead. And Abu Snei, by the way, today is considered a hero in Hebron. He got a life sentence, but 4 years later, he was released because of a deal where Israelis traded in hundreds of Palestinians for a few soldiers. And then the government said that the Jews can move back. But it took a struggle, just like the other buildings I showed you. It took a major struggle. But today, in this whole complex, there are 35 families, and hopefully it'll be growing soon. Now we're going to enter the Jewish community of Tel Rameda. As you can see, it's a living place. Laundry being hung out. The Jewish community here, although outnumbered, is flourishing. I like to save the best for last, and what we're about to see now, in my opinion, is the best. At 4,700 years old, Hebron is one of the world's oldest cities. And behind me, we see some of that. So come take a look. You have, first of all, those stairs, which look like they could have been created recently, last week. Those stairs are 4,700 years old, before Abraham, when the Canaanites lived here. And this wall is actually mentioned in the Bible, where the context is the spies that Moses sends. Moses sent spies to go and check out the land and see what was there. And the 12 spies, including Caleb and Joshua, are going to come to Hebron and see the giants. Remember we mentioned before, Kiryat Arba. Arba was the name of one of the giants. So when they came back, they gave a report that we can't win this war. Why are we going to enter Israel? We won't win. And of course, Caleb said, God said we're going to enter. He said we're going to win. We have to trust him. And Joshua also supported that, but 10 were frightened to do so. And what did they say? In the book of Numbers, but the people that dwells in the land is powerful. The cities are walled and very great. When they saw this very thick wall, this is just the remnants of, they got frightened. So that's mentioned in the Bible. Tel Rameda has about 15 Jewish families. I want to show you something from biblical times, a home that existed during the times of Isaiah and Hezekiah. These walls over here are from biblical times, from the time of Isaiah and Hezekiah, who was descended of King David. Now, by the way, King David, his first capital was here in Hebron. He ruled for 40 years. The first 7 was here. And many of the buildings that we see behind those pillars, those buildings that are further back, were actually there during the time of David. Now, Hebron, as I mentioned, is a living community. Jews were exiled from Hebron in 1929, but we returned. And just like the prophet said, the streets will be filled with joy and the sound of the kids. That is what's happening today. Hebron is one of my favorite cities, and you can see why. Because the past meets the present and the future, and now we have returned to Hebron. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining the tour. I hope you had a good time, and remember, when you tour Israel with nosson, Israel is real.